Hello. Oop. Make my mic working. There we go. Hey y'all, good to see you guys. I am back in New York. And yeah, thank you all for joining for this kind of random session. I know this is not part of the usual schedule, but I'm glad to see that so many people were able to make it. But yeah, this session will be a lot shorter than usual. It's just focused on, just clarifying some of the questions people have with Git and the command line. So pretty quick. It's not going to be super in depth, but hopefully by the end of today, we should all have a lot more clarity on Git and stuff. The Git install stuff. Yes, we can all run through that together. I know that's like the links I shared probably weren't the best resources for that, but yeah, we can all just make sure we all have Git set up. So that could be one of our focus for today. Let me go ahead and I'll start with the command line stuff, and then when we get to the Git stuff, we can all kind of install it together. That way we make sure we're on the same page. But yeah, I guess I'll just go ahead and kick it off right now. Probably don't have everyone here yet, but that's okay. Like I said, today's like a shorter session, so should be about like an hour, something like that, maybe less. But yeah, let's go ahead and kick it off. Yeah, so the agenda for today is first we're going to start with the command line, which is kind of like a higher level subject. So we're going to talk about the command line and what that is. You might have heard that word being thrown around. You've probably heard me talk about the terminal and stuff. So we're going to finally go and really explain what that all is and just talk about some basic commands. And then we'll get into like Git and setting up Git, installing that, go through a very basic Git workflow together. And yeah, we're just gonna have a demo where we kind of all just walk through what this exactly looks like. And at the end, I'll just share some bonus resources. There's no homework for this because this is just a skill we'll just continue to hone as we work through the material. And then we'll end with a Q&A. And yeah, that should be it. Like I said, not too much, just mostly informational. But yeah, should be a little lighter than usual. Okay, so let's just start with the command line. So basically, the easiest way to explain the command line is it's a way to interact with the computer's operating system by typing commands. And you can do things like create files, navigate between folders. And one way I've always liked to think of it is it's basically a non-visual way to do everything you can do in Finder if you're on Mac or File Explorer. So you know how on Finder you can go like here, if I open up Finder right now, this is my Finder, right? It's like all my files, and you can see my desktop and files and all that. Like I can create a new folder, you see, delete files and all that. Basically, one of the purposes of the command line is that you can do all the same things that you can do on Finder. So some people might ask, like, why the heck would you do everything in a command line where you can just do it in Finder? Well, it's like in the beginning, yeah, it's kind of hard to see the purpose of why you would do anything in a command line, just because, it's much easier to see the stuff visually. But as you get more advanced, you'll start to see that it's a lot more efficient sometimes to do things in the command line, even if it's not visual. So it's one of those things like in the beginning, it's like, yeah, it's arguable whether it's more beneficial to doing things in Finder or File Explorer, but as you get deeper, it becomes a lot more apparent. Let me go back to slides. And so the language we use in the command line, so there's actually another programming language that we're introducing here. And the language that we use when we talk to the command line or type commands in the command line is typically a Unix-based language called Bash. If you're on Windows and you use the default Windows one, you're going to be using a different language called the Windows Command Shell language. But typically, what we focus on is writing Bash commands. So we'll get to what exactly that looks like in a second. Hey, Antonio, good to see you. And yeah, most modern computers come with a command line already built in. Like if you're on Mac, you're going to have Terminal, like the Terminal app. I think Linux has a Terminal app as well. On Windows, you have the Windows Command Prompt or command.exe. I think there's also like PowerShell, which is like another one that Windows has. While these can do most things, they aren't very extensible. Like you'll rarely see me open up the terminal app. On Windows, you'll rarely see me use the Windows command prompt. Typically, I like to use a third-party one, and the one I usually use is Hyper. I think I've shared the link for this a few times. Here's the URL if you want to download it. It should be really quick. So I like using Hyper, and that's for all platforms. So any operating system you are on, you should be able to use it. I also like the one that's included in VS Code. So VS Code actually does have one that's built in, and really, honestly, most of the time I'm using the VS Code one these days. But when I'm not in VS Code, I usually use the Hyper one. So that's just what I preferred. And if you're on VS Code, you can do Control plus this backtick symbol, and it will open the integrated terminal. So we'll go over that in just a second. And this is the same command for Windows and Mac. I did confirm. Oh yeah, so someone said you can get Bash on Windows 11 easily since Windows 11 has a good terminal. Oh yeah, I've heard that new versions of Windows have like an improved terminal, because I know like before working with the Windows command prompt, it's not that great. So yeah, if you're on Windows, the new command prompt should be better. But just for consistency, like I like to have it so that, no matter what happens to my computer, or even if I'm on a Windows machine, I just like to have things consistent, which I like Hyper for that reason. But honestly, it doesn't matter. Like it's whatever you prefer. These are just the ones I find myself using. So Antonio asks, when will you put this class on YouTube? So right after this session ends, I'm going to be uploading last Tuesday session, and this session onto YouTube. So hopefully it should be on by today. So I'll ping the Discord when that's up. Okay, so that's a very basic overview of the command line. Now let's talk about some basic commands. So these commands are bash commands. And honestly, there's so many out there. You don't have to memorize all of them. I'll point out the ones that I use the most, but these are the basic ones that a lot of beginners should be somewhat familiar with. So we have PWD, which is basically stands for print working directory. It just tells you what folder you're currently on, right? Directory is just another way to say folder, essentially. It shows you where you are in the file system. I don't use this one too often because most terminals, like they already say what folder you're on. So I don't find myself using PWD that often, but it's a good starter command. We have, the slides. If you just want to do the !slides command. Oops, sorry, I spelled that wrong, haha. !slides. Oh, if you want to print the slides, I have to export them to PDF. So if you're in the Discord, I think you might be in the Discord. I shared a link to the slides there. I didn't do that today, but I'll do that right after. So I'll set a reminder to myself to put the slides. Okay, you're in the Discord. But yeah, that's my bad. Apparently only I can export these to PDF for some reason. So I will upload that for you. Cool. So the PWD command, don't use this one too often. These five are the ones I use the most often. So ls basically is like it lists the files. So if you're in a folder and you want to know what files are in there, you can just use the ls command. It'll give you a list of all of them. And then we have the cd command, which is basically change directory. So if you want to move around to a different folder, you can use the cd command. You can use the mkdir command to create a new directory. It's basically like make a directory. So if you want to create a new folder, just the mkdir command. If you want to create a new file, there's the touch command. And if you want to remove a file, there's rm. If you want to actually move or rename a file, you can use mv. And there's cp for copy. So honestly, like reading all this is probably not going to make much sense because there's no way you can just memorize these just from looking at it. So it's probably best that we go ahead and go through a basic demo of some of these in action. So let's just do a demo of these basic commands. mkdir, yeah. And is this the beginning of GitHub? Kind of, yeah. This is like the very basics of Git and GitHub. So this is all kind of like bundled in one session. But we're gonna start with the terminal stuff and then get into GitHub in a second. But let me go ahead and open a terminal, and I welcome you. I don't know if you guys can hear my cat wailing, but they're wailing quite loud. So I would encourage you to open up a terminal. Once again, it doesn't matter which one you use. If you don't have one downloaded and you're on Mac, you can just use the terminal one. If you're on Windows, you can use like Windows command prompt or something. But I'm just going to use Hyper just because that's the one I usually use. And let's go and do some basic commands. Where's my terminal? Oh, here it is. All right. Okay, so hopefully you guys have this terminal pulled up. Let me make this a little bigger. So, yeah, I mean, when I was first starting out, I liked the terminal because you look like a hacker, right? And like when other people, non-coders look at this, they're like, what are you doing? Like this is what they show in all the hacking scenes in movies. So it's kind of fun. But really, once again, I really just think of like a lot of the things you could do in here as the same things you could do in like Finder, for example, if you're on Mac, or File Explorer if you're on Windows. It's like very similar. So I often use this as a good reference because like you can create files, move files, like create folders, like all that stuff you could do in Finder or File Explorer, you could do here in Terminal. So basically starting out, like this tilde command, everyone might have like something different here. But basically what this means is, well, actually, we could just start with the pwd command to tell us what folder we're in or what directory we're in. So pwd, just press that. It says I'm in the /user/Zach folder, right? You see this right here. And I'm going to show my Finder on the left to kind of compare and contrast what we see in the terminal and what we see in Finder. So basically, oopsies. Sorry about that. Basically, I opened up my Zach folder on Mac. Once again, everyone has a different folder structure, and if you're on a different operating system, this is going to look totally different. But basically, I just want to show you that I'm essentially in this folder right here. This view of all these folders, I should have the same view in the terminal. And I can prove that by using the ls command. So ls is one of the most important commands, or like one of the most commonly used. And ls is basically just like list files, list folders. So I type in ls and press enter. I don't know if you guys can see that, but you see I have like applications, downloads, music, notebooks, projects, and it's hard to match up because there's so many, but essentially I'm getting the exact same thing. Like it's all of these folders here are the same things that show up here. So hopefully you have something similar. And once again, your exact folders obviously are going to be very different because my computer is my computer. But I just want you to get used to using ls and pwd to kind of see what folder you're in, and use ls to see like what's in that folder. So yeah, Antonio asked a really good question. Like why, I'm curious why people use this terminal. Honestly, it's kind of hard to see in the beginning. Like one of the main reasons I'm introducing this first is just to get to git commands, because that is one of the most useful things you can do in the terminal. But really, like in the beginning, like I said, it's like you can do all the same things in Finder. It's just like as you get better at using the terminal, eventually there reaches a point where you're more efficient in the terminal than in Finder. But in the beginning, it's kind of hard to see that, to be honest. Okay, so we just showed the ls command. Pretty straightforward. You should definitely get used to using this one a lot. Now I'm going to show you the second most used command called cd. Right, cd is change directory. So cd is basically the equivalent of me clicking on one of these folders and opening it. So let's say I open my notebooks folder. Like I double click it and I open this folder. Let's say we want to do the exact same thing in the terminal. So this is my notebooks folder, right? And using ls, I can see I have a folder right here called notebooks. And what I can do is do cd notebooks, just like that. So if you type in cd and then the name of the folder and click enter, nothing really has changed too much besides, I don't know if you guys have noticed that instead of saying tilde now here, it now says notebooks. And if I do ls again, you can see I have my env folder in this LangChain Python notebook that I was messing around with, which is basically the same thing we see in this Finder. So basically all of this is just to illustrate I'm doing the exact same thing that I'm doing here in Finder, just in the terminal, in a slightly more confusing manner. So yeah, that's basically just to illustrate that the exact same thing's happening. But cd is basically the equivalent of me double clicking a folder and opening it. Excuse me. Okay, so what else to show? Oh yeah, so let's say we want to zoom back out, right? In Finder, if I wanted to go back to my previous folder, so basically the folder that has my notebooks folder, well, one way I can do that is clicking this back button, which takes me back into my Zach folder. Or you could do Command or Control Up, which will take you outside, so they both do the same thing. So how will we do the same thing in the terminal, right? Let's say we want to zoom back out, essentially. Like we want to go from our notebooks folder to this home folder, which is this tilde. So what we could do is do cd space dot dot. And dot dot will take us outside of the current folder. So we do cd dot dot, press enter. As you can see, we have the tilde again. And if I do ls, you can see that we're back in the outside folder. Okay, so we just basically uncovered how to do the CLI equivalent of opening a folder and then going back out. Not too impressive, but this is just like really basic stuff, right? Just the basics. Okay, what else to show? Let's say I want to delete, or let's say I want to make a new folder. How about that? Let's say I want to make a new folder called, I don't know. I don't have a folder hand on name, but let's pretend we create a new folder called, I don't know. Let's say we're learning a different programming language like Swift, and I want to create a folder for my Swift projects. So what I can do is use the mkdir, mkdir, or make directory command to create a new folder. So this is the equivalent of me in Finder right-clicking and saying new folder, right? So if I create a new folder here, like test, and basically mkdir does the same thing. So let me delete this folder. So let's create this folder called Swift projects or something. So mkdir space Swift projects. Click enter. I don't know if you guys saw that, but as soon as I clicked enter, you could see that our new folder showed up in our Finder, right? So we do know that it's been created. So that's how we create a new folder. Let's say we want to create a new file in the Swift projects folder. Well, first we have to cd into the Swift projects folder. So let's cd into Swift projects. Okay, so it says now we're in the Swift projects folder. And to create a new file, let's say we want to create, I don't know, let's say we want to create like a, just a txt file. I don't know why, but let's just create it like a readme txt or something. We can use the touch command. It's kind of a weird name. I don't know why they call it touch. I'm sure there's some like history lesson that explains why. But if you want to create a new file, use touch. If you want to create a new folder, you use mkdir or mkdir. So let's use touch, and then let's call it like readme.txt, and I click enter. Nothing, we don't see anything, but if I do ls, you can see that my previously empty folder now has a file in it, which is the readme.txt. And we can confirm this in our Finder or File Explorer by clicking on our Swift projects folder and seeing that we have this readme. Okay, cool. And there's nothing in this file, right? We just, touch basically just creates a blank file. So that's something to note. Okay. So yeah, that's really not, there's not much else to show with the commands. Like basically this is the very basics of all the stuff you can do in Finder. Obviously there's way more to go into in Bash, but we're just trying to learn enough that we can get to our Git stuff. I guess I'll just end this by maybe showing two other things, which is if you ever want to move this file. So let's say we want to actually move this file out of here. Let's move this file from this folder into this folder. So how would we do that? Well, we can use the mv command, which I think is short for move. So mv, the mv actually takes two things. First, we have to say what file we want to move. So in this case, readme.txt, space, and then after the second space, we want to say where we want to move it. So in this case, we want to move it outside. And let's say we want to move it and change the name for some reason. Let's say I actually want this to be all uppercase readme.txt. So readme is an uppercase and then .txt. So we wanted to do that and move it outside of the Swift projects folder. We can do dot dot slash. So remember, dot dot takes you outside of the current folder. So that's why we do dot dot. Dot dot slash readme in all caps .txt. So this will move our readme file outside and rename it to be capital readme.txt. So let's click enter. As you can see, I don't know if you guys noticed that, but it it moved my file from this folder and it moved it to the folder outside, and it changed the name. So yeah, just some basic commands. There's lots more to show with like copying files and all that. Maybe also show how to remove files, right? Obviously I'm not doing Swift stuff right now. Obviously I'm not doing anything with this README file. So let's actually just delete it. If we wanted to delete it, basically the equivalent of moving this into the trash, we can just do rm for remove, rm. Actually, let me move out first, right? Remember that we're in the Swift projects folder. That's one thing to know. You have to always be careful of which folder you're in. So I actually got to move outside first. There we go. Now I'm back in this home folder. I'm going to do rm readme.txt, and that will delete it, basically. So enter. As you can see, the file has disappeared, and it's now in my trash. So let's do the same thing for Swift projects. We could do rm Swift projects. Oh, actually, it doesn't work. It says actually it's a directory. And that's because rm by itself only works for files. To remove a directory, we have to use rm space dash rf. Basically, it means like that's a fancy syntax for just saying we want to remove recursively. So if there are folders inside of Swift projects, this warning is basically saying, hey, you can't remove it because like if you remove that folder, like what's going to happen to the things inside? So you have to explicitly say that I'm removing this folder and everything else inside. So that's why we have to do rm space dash rf Swift dash projects. So this will properly delete our folder. Okay, so as you can see, it's gone. Once again, this seems like a lot to memorize, and it is, but it's one of those things that, as you get more used to it, like you'll naturally get a lot faster. This is not something you absolutely have to master just off the bat. This is just something that you have to like kind of know about. And then as you go through and build more complex projects, you'll naturally get better at this like workflow. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Once again, I don't want us to overcomplicate anything. It's basically just like doing things in the Finder or doing things in File Explorer, just with just in a more confusing way, essentially. Okay, so I'm gonna leave that for now. I'm gonna go back to the slides. Okay, so now we're gonna switch topics a little bit. So we've talked about the command line and just like how to run commands in that. Now it's time to talk about Git. So what is Git exactly? So the easiest way to explain it is it's a way for a group of people, so like a group of developers or whatever, to keep track of changes to a project. So if your project's like a book or a website, it just provides an easy way for people to keep track of changes. The closest analogy I can think of is to Google Docs, right? You know how Google Docs, like when you have multiple people in a Google Docs and people make changes, I don't know if you guys have seen like the revisions history or version history in Google Docs. Basically, like Git is like that layer that Google Docs has for collaboration, but for coding. I don't know if anyone here remembers what it was like collaborating before Google Docs in like Microsoft Word. If you sent your Microsoft Word document to like 100 people and they all made changes, it's kind of hard to organize that stuff, right? Without some kind of like version history. And that's what basically Git solves. So the way it works is when someone wants to make a change to the code or whatever, they have to first commit it to the project history, right? So the equivalent of this in Google Docs is like if I go into Google Docs and I change someone's text, that change is a commit, right? That's what we call it. It's a commit. And it's basically a new line in the document's history. So this lets everyone see who made the change and why. So in Google Docs, like if I make a change, if you look at the version history, you should be able to see that my email was associated with that change, and you should be able to see what I changed. And the reason why this is helpful is because if you're working on a code base with like 100 other people, and someone makes a change that doesn't work, or maybe it breaks the code, and this happens all the time across all companies, basically Git is a lifesaver because you can use Git to roll back to an earlier version of the commit. It's kind of like a time machine. So it basically lets you see the history of changes. So that, let's say, like, my code was working today, or let's say my code was working yesterday, but today I made a change that broke all my website. Well, one, I could panic, which is natural, or I could just go back and find the last time my site was working and roll back to that version. So it's a very easy way to go back to different times of my code. So there's many platforms that revolve around Git, including GitHub, which is the one we recommend and use in this class, GitLab, and Bitbucket. They're really all very similar, just like different, like they all do basically the same things. It's just GitHub is by far the most popular. So I highly recommend that. And yeah, there's not much else to say about GitLab and Bitbucket besides they're less popular and but they basically operate the same. Like once you learn GitHub, you basically can take the same knowledge onto GitLab or Bitbucket. So it's pretty cross-platform knowledge. And there's two main ways we interact with Git or GitHub. One, a lot of the students here have already kind of encountered, which is GitHub Desktop. So GitHub Desktop is to Finder or File Explorer as the Git command line is to the terminal, right? The GitHub Desktop is basically a visual way to use Git. But then the quote unquote real way, or like the most common way people interact with Git, is with the command line. So we use Git commands in the terminal that we were just talking about. And that's basically how most pro developers use Git. So while GitHub Desktop is fine for beginners, I want us to kind of get used to moving away from doing things in GitHub Desktop and more used to doing things in the command line. So we'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, so basically here is a very basic Git workflow. Like this is what a example of a Git workflow could look like. So first, when you're wanting to create a new folder, you could create a new blank folder on your computer, but in order for that folder to be understood as a Git folder, right? Because not all folders are Git friendly, right? We have to explicitly say, hey, this folder, I want to have Git enabled. And the way we do that is running the git init command in our command line. So I'll say, in this folder, set up a Git project, basically. So after we do that, let's say we're making a website, right? We create our index.html, our index.css, our JS, all that stuff, right? Stuff we've done before. After we make those changes, let's say we want to take our code and push it online. We would then run a command that's called git add. And git add is basically saying, hey, here are all the changes that we made. Let's add them to our upcoming commit. And then this is when we actually make the commit using the git commit command. So git commit saying like, hey, we made all these changes and they're all associated with this commit. Okay, and then that's all the steps to make a commit. But to actually push this code online to like GitHub or something, we have to, well, first we have to make sure it's connected to the online GitHub repo, which we can use with Git remote. This is probably the most confusing one, so I'll explain this in the demo more. But we have to make sure it's connected to a GitHub repo using Git remote. And then finally, after we are done with our changes and we want to push them live, then we use the git push command. So this, once again, same with the CLI commands or the command line commands. It's like you don't have to memorize this all. And honestly, this is probably a pretty confusing way to look at it. But just as a high level like glance, this is basically the workflow that you would be going for. And to really simplify it, most of the time, since git init and git remote add are like one-time things, you don't have to do those every single time you make a change. You only do those basically once per repository. Most of the time, it's really just 3 commands, which is git, or the flow is like you make changes, you add the changes with git add, you commit the changes with git commit, and you push the changes with git push. So if you want a super simple version of that, that is how I think about it. The rest of these are just like stuff you do to set up. And so this is all for like if you're creating a new project from scratch. If you're downloading an existing project or repository, you can use the git clone command. So we'll show all of these in a second. And by second, I mean right now. So let's put it all together. Let's put everything we've learned together about the CLI and GitHub, and let's go ahead and pretend that we're going to create a brand new project. We're going to set it up as a Git project. We're gonna make some changes in our code. We're gonna push the code onto GitHub, and yeah, that's basically it. So it's very similar exercise to what we did before in GitHub Desktop. We're just doing the equivalent in our terminal instead. So, all right. So the easiest way to do this, actually, I know I said VS Code here, but let's actually start in our terminal while we have it open. So I'm gonna. Oh yeah, if you ever want to clear up your workspace a little bit, like all of this stuff is old, I don't want it to clutter my screen. I can just type in a clear command, or I think you can do Command K too, but clear should be a command that should work for most terminals. So I type in clear, and it basically clears everything, which is nice. Okay, so first I'm going to navigate to my projects folder, and I'm going to create a brand new project. So let's go ahead and use ls to see all the folders I have. Okay. I'm going to cd into my projects folder. So I'm going to cd projects. And then it says I'm in a projects folder. I'm going to use ls to see all my projects. And then I'm going to cd again into my Bootcamp projects, because that's specifically where I want to go. So cd Bootcamp projects. Okay, so now I'm in my Bootcamp projects folder. I'm gonna use ls again. And these are all some of the projects that we worked on before. So now I'm gonna use Mictor to create a new folder. And I'm just gonna call this git demo or something. So yeah, Mictor git demo, click enter. And now if I ls again, you can see that our git demo folder has been created. It's right here. Cool, so I'm going to go ahead and cd into git demo. And one thing to note is if you have the code command installed, you should be able to do code space dot if you want to open this whole folder in VS Code. But since my VS Code is connected to a different instance, I'm not going to do that. And then I'm going to go ahead and before we do that though, let's go through the workflow. So we've created a new folder, but we also want to set it up as a git command, as a git folder. Sorry. So we have to run git init, and this is where we can talk about like making sure you have git installed. Because if you write git init and it gives you an error, then you don't have git set up yet. So git init. Go ahead and see if you can type in git space init. Press enter, and if all has worked well, you should see something like initialize git repository. If you type git init and you don't get that, let me know in the chat so we can debug. But I believe if you've installed GitHub Desktop before, you should have git commands already installed. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure GitHub Desktop also installed these git commands. So let me know if anybody's having trouble with this. We'll just pause here and make sure that everyone is caught up. Basically, if you want like a deep dive of what git init does, it basically creates a hidden folder called .git in your project. So that basically symbolizes that it's a Git project. Oh yeah, I saw the bot. I was like, wait, what is that? I don't think they're here to learn web development, but. Do we need the command line developer tools? Yes, you should. If it's asking you to install those, go ahead and install those first. I think you might have to install those before you install Git. Cool. All right, hopefully everyone is good here. I'll go ahead and continue, but yeah, if you do have problems with the Git installation, just send me a DM on Discord, and we can take a look at it. But I believe if you've installed GitHub Desktop, you should have these commands already. But do let me know if anybody doesn't have these commands. Okay, so if I run ls again, we see nothing, which is fine. So now we basically want to open this folder in VS Code. So if you have VS Code commands, you should just be able to type in code space dot, which basically will open this current folder in VS Code. But if you don't have the commands installed, then this probably won't work. I'll show you how to install it if you don't have it already. And once again, for anybody that's new, I have two versions of VS Code, one that I use for this class and one that I use for my old projects. And I think this is the version I have for my own project, so it might look a little different. Yeah, this is the version I have for mine. I'm trying to think, where did that go? Coming in. I might not have the. Yeah, I might not have the command prompt example anymore. That's okay. If you do want to install that code command, I'm trying to think where you can. In VS Code, if you do Command Shift P and you type in install, or just if you type in basically like shell in the command prompt, you should see something like this: shell command, install code command in path. If you run this, you'll be able to open folders in terminal with the code command. I'm not going to install it because I already have it. But this is, if you don't have that command, you can do that. I'm also going to switch over to the other version of VS Code that I have and not use my my work one. So just pretend that I opened this up using the command line. Open folder, Bootcamp projects, git demo. There we go. Yes, I trust. Okay, cool. So we basically have nothing in here. It's very, it's a blank folder. So now we're gonna pretend that we're gonna run some code, right? Where I'm not. This is not focused on HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. So I'm just gonna create a basic index to HTML file, but you can do whatever you want. You don't have to even create any code. Like you could just do like a README or something. But let's just say I want to create an HTML file. So I'm just going to create a very, very quick HTML file. Yeah, I'm not gonna bother to like fill it out. It's something like that. And if you don't want to do all this, feel free to just create a new file that's called like readme.md or something. And then here you can write markdown like this is a test git project. Something like that. Okay, but the point is I made some changes, right? I basically created a new file, or I created two new files, and now I want to push this code onto GitHub. So let's go through doing that. But before we begin though, I also want to show us the integrated terminal in VS Code. Right, before we were just doing everything in Hyper, which is fine. But one nice thing about the integrated terminal is it's all in the same window, right? Like right now, my terminal is in a separate window as my code editor, but it's very convenient to have the terminal embedded in the code editor. So I'm actually going to close Hyper. So I'm just going to quit out of this, and I'm going to open a terminal in VS Code by using Control backtick, or yeah. If you need the actual command, it's, where is it? Oh yeah, here, Control plus backtick. I don't know if you guys can see that, but that's how you can open the integrated terminal. If that's not working for you, you can also just use Command Shift P or Control Shift P to open the command prompt in VS Code and just type in terminal. It should be, yeah, create new terminal or something. That should open one up for you. So that's another way to do it. But as you can see, now that I've opened up the terminal, it's just right here, right? It just basically creates a new panel on my code editor, which is really convenient. And what's more, check out this file that we're in, or this folder that we're in, right? We're already in the same folder. So it's convenient, right? I didn't need a CD into anything. It knows that, okay, if you're opening the terminal in a project, we're gonna open the terminal to that project as well. So it's very convenient. And I can prove this by typing ls, and you can see that we see the same files. that we have on the left. Okay, so after we've made a change, before we add the files, one thing I would also get in the habit of is using this command called git status. So git status, like this. So basically after you make a change, if you want to see what you've changed exactly before you commit it, which is usually a good idea, you type in git status. Oops, I'm going to press enter. One second. There we go. I'm going to press enter. And as you can see, it tells you the branch name. We're not going to talk about branches today, but it says the branch name. It says no commits yet, which makes sense. We haven't made any commits. And it here has this untracked files, right? So as you can see, the files that we created are in red. And basically Git is saying that, hey, you've made these 2 files, but Git is not tracking them, right? And in order to track them, we have to use git add. So one thing, if you want to quickly just add all of these files, right? Because one way to do it is you can type git add readme.md, press enter, and then git add index to HTML plus enter. But what if you have what if you created 20 files, right? You don't want to type git add 20 times. So typically what I do is I just type git add space dot. And dot will basically add all the files that you've changed in a folder. So some will say, for big projects, this is not safe. But in my experience, like git add space dot does the trick for most situations. And especially saves you the time of having to write git add individually. So just type git space add space dot, and this will add all the files and track the changes. So let's go ahead and run this command. Okay, there should be no output. But if we type git status again, so git status, enter, we can see now that the files that were red are now green because they're tracked. So they're tracked by GitHub, they're just not committed, right? It says changes to be committed, okay? So that means the next step is to commit. So we have to take all the files that we changed and made a commit. So we go ahead and type git, or to demonstrate what I mean, is let's say I create an additional file, or let's say I add some text onto README right after changing it. So let's say I add some text, more text, save. So I made another change, right? If I type in git status, it should say, hey, not everything is tracked, right? Because we just made another change. So we have to, once again, run git add every time we make a change and we want to track it. So I'm going to write git add again, git status. And as you can see, the files are all green again. So now Git is aware of our changes. Okay, so we've just did git add. Let me make this bigger. Now I'm going to commit our changes. So I'm going to run git commit. And for commit is a little funky. Typically after commit, we put -m. And -m basically is short for message. Like, it's good practice after you make a change to have some message associated with that. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's say you're working on a project and you create a new landing page, right? But maybe only you know you created a landing page, right? What if other developers don't know what you're doing? Well, having the commit message say that, oh, this set of changes was for the landing page is super helpful, not just to you, but for other developers, right? It's basically like, it's a description of what you've changed, essentially. So, when you're working on solo projects, honestly, you could just type whatever you want. It doesn't matter. Like, you just type gibberish. But I encourage you to just get into good practice of being somewhat descriptive as to what you changed. It's just, no, if you look at my commit messages, I am not the best example of this, because a lot of my commit messages are just like swear words, or just or just like I made the stupid change, or like I wrote something stupid. That's a lot of my commit messages, but that's because I work on projects solo. But if I'm working with a team, it's good to write real commit messages. So let's say, basically all we did here was create a blank or a basic index HTML file and a README. So maybe we'll just say that. So maybe we say on our message, oh yeah, we have to put our message in double quotes. That's another thing notes. or I guess it can be single quotes too, but you can do double quotes or single quotes. So commit message -m double quotes, and I'm going to say created index.html and readme and double quote. So yeah, it should look something like this, right? Git commit -m and then your message. Okay, so now I'm going to click enter, and we should see something like this. We should see, yeah, so this is our commit name. It says 2 files changed, 12 insertions. This is basically saying we've added 12 lines of code. So that's what that's saying. And yeah, you don't have to worry about this too much. But basically, if you see something like this, that means our commit was successful. We successfully created our commit. Okay, so now we've created our commit, but now we want to add this to a repository. But we don't have a repository yet, right? All I did was create this folder on my computer. When we were using GitHub Desktop, we kind of did this all in one step. But now that we're using the command line, we have to actually go into GitHub and create our repository. So am I logged into GitHub? I always forget. I don't think I am. Whoa, GitHub changed the landing page. 1 second, let me pull up a different browser and I'm gonna switch back to Arc really quick. Okay. Okay, so this is my GitHub. This is my GitHub, and what I want us to do is first create a new repository. So you can either create it up here with this plus button, or you can create it with this new repository button. Either works. I'm just going to click it here. Okay. So create a new repository. Excuse me. And I'm just going to call this git demo, git-demo. And once again, you can leave the description blank. You could set it to be public or private. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Well, I guess it does matter. Private is like if this is a project that you're going to turn into a company or something, you should probably make it private. But if you're just going to show off your work, we're just going to do public. I'll just leave it as public. And then all this initialization stuff, we can kind of skip because we already created our own README file, right? We created it right here. So we don't need to check any of this. We don't need to worry about the git ignore. We'll talk more about that later. And license is more for like, if you're creating an open source package and you don't want other people to like steal your code without like attribution, then you would use a license. But since this is just a demo, we're just gonna ignore all this. So yeah, basically just fill out a name and leave everything else untouched. Okay, I'm gonna now create the repository. And you should see something like this. It's going to be a lot of gibberish, but basically, because we already have a repository, we need to run this git remote add. So this command is basically saying, hey, this git repository right here that we're looking at, I want to associate this git repository with this folder that we have in our computer, right? Right now, they're not linked. They're separate. And this command basically links them. So we can just copy and paste this. Copy. And then in my terminal right here, I'm going to paste it. Whoa. Go away. So I'm going to paste that, and I'm going to press enter. And if you see nothing, that means it worked. Basically, there should be no output. And now after this command, this repository, this GitHub folder is now linked to this repository. Great. Now it's going to also recommend doing git branch m. Basically, this is just going to set the main branch to be called main. Before, GitHub used to create branches with master, but main is a lot more of a PC term than master, so that's why the industry is moving towards main. So just copy and paste this command, paste it into your terminal, press enter. I think we're already on main, but this will just like set it as the main branch. Okay, once again, no output, so that's a good sign. Okay, so now we've made our commit, and now we need to push our code. So we can just copy and paste this command, git push -u origin main, or you can just do git push origin main. I think they're the same here. But basically, this is going to push our commits, all of the commits. In this case, we only made one, but if we made multiple, it'll push all of our commits and push them to GitHub. So I'm going to copy paste that command. I'm going to click enter. And you should see something like this. And after this means that our code has been pushed. So how do we know it worked? Well, we can go into our GitHub repository, and if we refresh the page, you should see the code that we wrote, right? We have our README, we have our index.html, great. Okay, so obviously this is all very similar to what we were doing with GitHub Desktop, right? None of this stuff is very new. But one of the things that people had a lot of problems with was like, hey, I have a website on GitHub and I want to make some changes. How do I push that up, right? Because GitHub Desktop makes it really easy to create an initial change, but it's not as simple to make changes. So let's pretend we made some changes. Let's pretend we added like a header to our site or something. Yeah, let's say like we just added this basically, just like this is a header. Oops. So we made this change. And once again, this is the flow that I want us to get used to. So we made a change. We add the change. So git add space dot enter. So we add the change. We commit the change. So git commit -m. And then we want to say what we changed. So in this case, we added a header or something. Enter. And then we push the change. So git push. So just before I push, I want to show the code that we have on GitHub, right? This is just our hello world. But once I type git push and press enter, and I refresh the page here, so I'm going to refresh the page, you can see that we now have our header. So this is the flow that I want us to get used to. Make a change, git add, git commit, and git push. That is like most of Git. There's a lot more to it too, but that's basically like 70% of what you should know. There's going to be a lot more stuff with Git when we start to do more collaborative projects, because that's when it starts to get a little more hairy. But for solo projects, this is basically most of what you need to know. Make a change, git add, git commit, and git push. Okay, and that's basically it. That's basically it. Everything else is like, I think you guys have like worked with before in GitHub Desktop, but that's what I really wanted to show. So, if you want to go back to some of your old website projects that we worked on in the beginning, now you know how to make changes, right? Now you know how to make a change, git add, git commit, and git push. And yeah, I just find that the embedded terminal works really well for that. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the slides now. Okay, so I'm just going to end with some resources. I just added some links here. We have Git Immersion, which is like a very high-level basic tutorial. We have this like more in-depth like blog post from HubSpot. So if I click on that, yeah, it's just like a more in-depth version of kind of what we're talking about today. So if you do want more like clarity or just like want to know a little bit more about Git, feel free to check out this tutorial. It's pretty good. And then finally, I added this learn Git branching. This is, I would only recommend like if you're more advanced or like you want to revisit this. Like I honestly think this is too advanced for our use cases right now. But in the future, let's say you want to know more about Git for a job or something, this is a good site to kind of like get deeper into it. But honestly, I would just recommend the first two if you're a beginner. These two links right here. And there's no homework since, we have a session tomorrow and this is just like a very basic bonus session. And we're going to like continuously be using these commands as we go forward. But if you took away nothing from today, it's just like command line commands, just get used to using CD and LS. That's like most of what you need. And for Git, just get used to doing this flow. I make a change, I add the change, I commit the change, and then I push the change. That, if you got nothing else from today, that is basically it. Okay, cool. So like I said, pretty short session. We're basically done for today. I'll just leave some time for Q&A. But if nobody has any other questions, I'll go and prepare the slides for tomorrow because I still have to do that. But yeah, any questions? Hopefully today was like fairly understandable. I know it's one of those things that it feels like a lot. It feels like a lot of commands you have to digest. I know that because back when I was learning, I was really confused by Git and all that. But I wish I could go back and tell myself it's really not that bad. For the most part, all you need to know is make a change, git add, git commit, and git push. Oops, sorry about that. Okay. Any other questions? If not, I'm gonna go ahead and start wrapping up for today. Once again, I'm gonna upload this video onto YouTube. I'm gonna upload the last Tuesday session onto YouTube, so that's gonna be up by today. I'll upload the slides from this, or sorry, the PDF for these slides, because I know I forgot to do that. That's gonna be in Discord. And yeah, that's basically it. I mean, once again, today was just a really quick session. The main session for the week is tomorrow. And if you do want to prep a little bit for tomorrow, feel free to just check out the Svelte website, svelte.dev. And you don't need to understand any of this yet because we're going to go through all of it. But if you do want a sneak peek of what exactly we're going to be doing tomorrow, this website is a good place to do it. But yeah, for sure. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. Yeah, do let me know if you have any other questions related to Git or command line. But once again, this is more of like just a basic intro. We're gonna continuously work with Git and Bash stuff in the future. But hopefully this answers a lot of the questions that I saw in the Discord. All right, cool. It looks like there's no other questions. And in that case, I will go ahead and just start winding down for today. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining for this kind of like random session. But yeah, if you do have any final questions, feel free to let me know, or on Discord, I'm available. All right, cool, y'all. Thanks for joining. I'm gonna go ahead and start ending the stream now, because yeah, I do have to go and prep for tomorrow, so I will be doing that. But yeah, just keep an eye out for the YouTube for the uploaded videos, and I will see you guys tomorrow then. All right, everyone. Thanks so much. Take care. I waved at the right camera this time. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream now.